Have you ever considered that your decisions and actions might not entirely be your own? Have you had the feeling that some invisible force is subtly guiding you? Perhaps you've noticed yourself providing services you didn't truly want to offer, yielding in discussions where you were certain of your stance, or trusting individuals who later proved themselves untrustworthy. If such situations have occurred in your life, it's worth reflecting on the hidden mechanisms of influence. The truth is, manipulation surrounds us everywhere. Loved ones, the media, leaders, all of them, consciously or not, employ techniques to sway our minds. The most unsettling aspect is that we often fail to notice when we become objects of manipulation. This doesn't require hypnosis or complex mind control technologies like in movies. The most effective manipulation is that which convinces us of our own freedom of choice, that a decision made was exclusively ours, and that any mistake was our personal fault. Many people live unaware that they are being led, like pieces in a chess game they don't even realize is being played. And when they try to resist, they are overcome by feelings of guilt, fear, and doubt. They are emotionally trained not to oppose another's will. If you're currently thinking this doesn't apply to you, it's worth pausing and reflecting, as that is precisely the effect an experienced manipulator aims for. What lies behind this veil of deception, and how can you recognize manipulation in your own life? The answers to these questions may be unexpected and force you to reconsider much. This material will not offer ephemeral comfort. Instead, it will present effective tools that reveal the essence of manipulation. Those who have mastered the art of influence, much like Machiavelli's characters, do not resort to violence or coercion. They become observers, analyzing human weaknesses and skillfully exploiting them. Manipulators understand the hidden motives that drive people. And if an individual is unaware of their own impulses, they become easy prey. This text will further uncover the mechanisms of often unconscious manipulation, identify patterns, emotional traps, and hidden control methods. The reader will be able to pinpoint their own vulnerabilities and learn to protect their mind from encroachment. For true freedom lies not in blindly following desires, but in understanding their root causes. This text is addressed to those who are tired of being pawns in someone else's game, who have suffered in silence, been accused and silenced, who have felt the burden of conditioning. Here, the reader will gain the knowledge necessary to emerge from the shadow of a puppet and assume the role of a strategist. But remember, once you see the truth, it is impossible to return to former ignorance. From this moment, be prepared for the knowledge gained to forever change your perception of people and of yourself. Surely everyone has encountered individuals with an astonishing ability to achieve what they want, even when, seemingly, they don't deserve it. Yet, they don't resort to shouting, threats, or humble pleas. Their weapon is persuasion, engagement, and the skill to convince others that the concession was their own initiative. And this is not merely charisma, but a refined technique, manipulation in its purest and most effective form. A manipulator never acts spontaneously. Their tactic is observation and studying the target. They analyze reactions, identify weaknesses, and determine emotional needs. They unfailingly pinpoint moments when a person needs approval, fears rejection, or feels guilt for saying no. And then they use this knowledge for their own purposes. Manipulation begins long before the first word is spoken. It starts with a silent analysis of body language, vocal intonations, and pauses in speech. Some manipulators use charm as a tool. They offer smiles, lavish compliments, and constantly emphasize their exceptionality. They create the illusion that they see, hear, and understand the person, making them feel special. However, behind this mask of benevolence lies cold calculation. Manipulators skillfully create a sense of emotional debt in others. When someone displays excessive kindness, there's an instinctive desire to reciprocate. And it is at this moment that a person begins to yield, falling into the laid traps. There are individuals prone to adopting a martyr strategy, artfully playing the victim. They skillfully complain about unbearable burdens, universal misunderstanding, and how you are their only support. Gradually, imperceptibly, they place the weight of emotional responsibility on your shoulders. And should you merely attempt to distance yourself or refuse, other tactics come into play. Instead of open conflict, they resort to sighs, sarcastic remarks, and mournful glances. A skillful manipulator doesn't need to ask directly. They achieve their desires by cleverly prompting you to offer help. There are also those who use fear in their arsenal, painting terrifying pictures of impending catastrophes. If you do that, you'll be completely alone, they instill. If you leave me, you'll never meet anyone like me, they assert, as if casting a spell. They bind you with invisible threads, not chains, but insidious ideas, making you doubt your own ability to make decisions and act independently. Thus, you remain trapped, ensnared by your own mind. It's worth noting that such manipulative strategies are by no means a modern invention. Niccolò Machiavelli, in his immortal work, The Prince, dissected methods of manipulation with surgical impartiality, presenting them as a perfectly legitimate tool for retaining power. He was one of the first to realize that human actions are driven by interests and emotions, and that those who understand this can shape reality to their will. As Machiavelli wisely observed, people are prone to judge more by what they see than by what they feel. For sight is accessible to all, but touch to only a few. Manipulation, in essence, is an artfully staged visual and emotional performance designed to create an illusion of reality that benefits the manipulator. A skillful manipulator stages an entire spectacle for the unsuspecting individual, drawing them into a carefully directed production. They expertly assign roles, create a script, and compel their victim to play by their rules. The most dreadful aspect of this situation is that the person sincerely believes they are the author of their own destiny, unaware that this theater of the absurd exists only due to their internal vulnerabilities, emotional weakness, unfulfilled desires, or deeply buried needs. It is here that vulnerability enters the scene, transforming a person into easy prey for the manipulator. Until an individual recognizes their weak points, they will remain a puppet in someone else's hands, and manipulations will be presented to them as love, friendship, or respect. It is important to understand that it is not weak people who are manipulated, but people in general, for each of us has our own emotional blind spot, an unfulfilled aspiration, an unhealed emotional wound, or a hidden need that creates fertile ground for manipulation. The manipulator acts subtly and calculatingly. They do not coerce, but listen attentively, discerning what is hidden even from the person themselves. Many of us harbor an insatiable thirst for approval, for from an early age we were taught to please in order to earn love. We learned that love is not an unconditional right, but a reward that must be earned. This is why we begin to shape our behavior in a way that seeks acceptance, validation, and recognition. This need, this gaping void in the soul, becomes an invitation for the manipulator, who skillfully offers crumbs of affirmation, demanding blind loyalty in return. They say what the victim longs to hear, stripping them of autonomy and the right to their own decisions. There are individuals burdened by guilt, as if by an invisible weight. They reproach themselves for refusals, for prioritizing their own interests, for setting personal boundaries, because from childhood they learned that self-care is a manifestation of selfishness, and self-sacrifice is the highest virtue. As a result, even when feeling discomfort, they remain inactive, fearing to appear overly strict, ungrateful, or insensitive. Manipulators skillfully exploit this tendency towards self-blame, ingratiating themselves under the guise of well-wishers who solely seek their victim's good. Then, cloaking themselves in distorted moral principles, they begin to control others' decisions. Others live in constant fear, the fear of being rejected, of being alone, of being forgotten. These individuals desperately cling to any relationships, even destructive ones, just to avoid confronting the terrifying void. The manipulator offers them an illusory sense of security and then threatens to withdraw this phantom refuge. The victim is convinced of their own worthlessness without the manipulator, and they believe it, because their fears whispered it to them long before the perpetrator appeared. All these vulnerabilities have their roots. They do not arise from nothing. They are the consequence of past experiences, hidden traumas, and learned emotional patterns of behavior. Until a person addresses these emotional wounds, they will remain open, and those who approach with a hypocritical smile and insidious intentions will unfailingly find the pain points to press. Niccolò Machiavelli, a perceptive thinker, understood that true dominance is not founded on brute force, but stems from a deep understanding of human vulnerabilities. He noted the fickleness of human nature, its tendency to be persuaded, but also the difficulty of maintaining that conviction for long. A skillful manipulator does not expend effort on persuasion. Rather, they fill voids, penetrating where awareness is absent. However, there is a way out of this situation. One does not have to remain predictable in their emotional reactions. It is possible to learn to identify one's own vulnerabilities and strengthen them. Only then will an individual cease to be easy prey and gain clarity in life. This is precisely what the next part of the narrative will be dedicated to: developing true emotional defense, creating immunity to manipulation. The question arises, is the reader ready to stop being a puppet in someone else's hands? The next step will require considerable courage. Many yearn for liberation from manipulation, But only few are willing to pay the price for emotional freedom, for the painful realization, because, as is known, the truth sets you free, but first it causes pain. And the first wound requiring healing is the illusion that kindness, empathy, and understanding serve as reliable protection. Unfortunately, this is not the case. It is precisely these virtues, in the absence of clarity and awareness, that turn a person into a vulnerable target. Developing emotional resilience is not about becoming unfeeling, but rather about acquiring deep self-awareness. The essence lies in curbing involuntary responses to emotional stimuli, which manipulators skillfully use to achieve their goals. The first step on this path is identifying personal behavioral patterns. It is necessary to pause and carefully analyze the situation. What factors specifically cause you to make concessions? Perhaps it is the fear of upsetting others, the fear of rejection, or the desire to avoid conflict at all costs. Understanding these driving forces opens the path to changing behavioral strategies. The second important step is developing what Machiavelli would call strategic detachment. It is important to learn to maintain emotional distance in various situations without losing the capacity for empathy. This implies observing what is happening without immediate involvement, and being able to critically evaluate flattery without taking it at face value. One should pay attention to attempts at emotional manipulation and pause to consider their actions. Manipulators count on people acting under the influence of emotions without reflection. Their goal is to make you feel, not think. Therefore, it is crucial to maintain the ability for rational thought. The third cornerstone of protection against manipulation is the art of unpredictability. Masters of behind-the-scenes games build their schemes on the predictability of their victims' behavior. They meticulously study the map of emotional reactions, identifying pain points and vulnerabilities. A manipulator knows unfailingly that crocodile tears will elicit immediate sympathy, a generous dose of flattery will dull vigilance, and persistent pressure will break resistance. An effective counter-tactic is to disrupt this established pattern, playing ahead of the curve. Surprise the manipulator with an unexpected refusal where they expect unconditional agreement. Vanish when they are confident in your persistence. Maintain demonstrative silence in response to provocation, depriving them of the expected confrontation. Such tactics disorient the opponent, dismantle their carefully constructed game, and force them to reveal their true intentions. Another fundamental aspect of protection is forming a strong and independent personality. The deeper a person understands their values, beliefs, and goals, the less they feel the need for self-affirmation through others. And the less the need to prove one's worth, the harder it becomes to manipulate their feelings and decisions. Manipulators excel at controlling the victim's perception, making them doubt themselves, tormenting them with questions, and constantly reevaluating their actions, conforming to someone else's narrative. However, when one's internal self-perception becomes unshakable, external control loses its power, and attempts at manipulation shatter against the armor of confidence. Do not harbor illusions that emotional resilience arises from watching videos. No, it is forged in the crucible of daily self-work, requiring tireless self-analysis, overcoming the desire for universal approval, and firmly upholding one's own convictions, even when experiencing clear discomfort. It is born from the undeniable fact that a person owes nothing to anyone but the preservation of their conscience. The ability to maintain clarity of mind and sobriety of judgment in a world where everyone is involved in complex emotional games, in itself, becomes an act of defiance. Machiavelli once remarked that one should treat people either as friends, showing them signs of attention and honor, or as enemies, mercilessly destroying them, because half measures, such as slight offense, only breed a thirst for revenge. This thought, while perhaps lacking softness, reveals an unvarnished truth about human nature. In the struggle for power, there is no neutral position. One either subjugates the emotional field or becomes an object of manipulation oneself. But what if the manipulator is nearby, in the family, at work, or even in the marital bed? How does one act in situations where breaking off the relationship is not possible? In the subsequent narrative, the author intends to delve into the complex area of interpersonal manipulation, examine examples of close relationships, and propose strategies for countering emotional control, even when the manipulator is a loved one. And this, perhaps, will be the most serious test of one's spirit. It's easy to talk about manipulation when the puppeteer is a stranger. It's much harder to admit the bitter truth when control comes from a loved one, a parent, a romantic partner, a boss who offered help, or a friend known since childhood. In such situations, manipulations become more sophisticated and dangerous, as they are cloaked in affection, care, and loyalty. Fearing the loss of connection, a person gets caught in an emotional web that gradually consumes their energy, clarity of thought, and self-identity. A skillful manipulator doesn't necessarily resort to outright lies. They prefer to distort the truth. They don't need to raise their voice, hints suffice. They won't directly forbid a choice, but will induce guilt for a decision different from their expectations. Over time, the victim of manipulation stops asking questions, becomes cautious in words and actions, avoids conflict, and tries to anticipate the manipulator's reaction to maintain a fragile peace. Imperceptibly, the person finds themselves in an invisible prison, its walls built from emotional bricks. In romantic relationships, such behavior can be masked as strong attachment. I only do this out of love for you. My life loses meaning without you. However, love that demands unconditional submission is, in reality, emotional blackmail. In family relationships, manipulations are often veiled by tradition. You can't do that to your mother. You must respect your elders. But respect dictated by guilt is not true respect, but a tool of control. At work, manipulations can be presented as a display of loyalty. You should be grateful. Who else would give you such an opportunity? However, gratitude used as a means of keeping someone indebted is nothing less than pure manipulation. But here's what is absolutely essential to realize. Closeness and warm feelings are not an excuse for emotional abuse. Love, however strong it may be, does not give anyone the right to reshape another person using fear or guilt as tools. However, to break free from this vicious cycle, one must accept a bitter truth. Not every relationship, even those with strong attachment, is healthy and fulfilling. Not everyone who feels affection for you understands how to love you without limiting your freedom and individuality. And not every bond that keeps you close actually protects and nurtures. Some may simply hinder your personal growth and self-realization. But how does one act in such a difficult situation? First and foremost, it is necessary to establish clear boundaries. Firm and unambiguous boundaries that do not require constant justification and explanation. A simple and calm no, spoken with confidence, possesses far greater power than 1,000 emotional arguments and explanations. The next step is exposure. Speak openly about what you see, what you feel, and what you are no longer willing to tolerate. It is important to understand that this is not done to persuade the other person, but to assert your own position and declare your needs. And finally, it is necessary to stand your ground when the inevitable reactions follow. Because they will surely come. Insults, attempts to play the victim, demonstrative silence, all are tools of the manipulator. The manipulator feeds on your insecurity and indecision. They will test your boundaries, hoping that you will retreat and return to your old behavioral patterns. There is a truth that many prefer to avoid. Sometimes true love manifests in leaving. This means ending destructive relationships and allowing the other person to confront their problems independently. As long as you try to save, support, or justify, no change will occur, and you risk losing yourself. This is a difficult, but necessary decision. Only by freeing oneself from toxic ties can one gain a new vision, one that penetrates through words, masks, and superficial intentions. It is with this new perspective that we enter the next stage of life. How can Machiavelli's strategic thinking be applied in the modern world to protect your mind from constant influence? It's time to change the rules of the game. Machiavelli did not seek to please. He was not concerned with creating an impression of being ethical, virtuous, or benevolent. His devotion was directed toward the harsh, unvarnished reality that most prefer to ignore. To survive psychologically in the modern world, one must learn to think like him, with ruthless clarity, cold strategy, and emotional detachment. Make no mistake, we live in an era of continuous manipulation. Social media, marketing, politics, religion, relationships, everything is built on influence, image, and narrative. Those who are unaware of this become victims of these manipulations. Niccolò Machiavelli, a perceptive observer of human nature, believed that people in general are predictable and susceptible to their own interests and feelings. He asserted that power rests in the hands of those who grasp these deep mechanisms of human behavior. His famous phrase states, "People generally judge by appearances, not by reality, for seeing is for everyone, but feeling for few." In other words, perception often proves more important than truth itself. In the modern world, this principle is more relevant than ever. The one who shapes public opinion also guides decisions. The one who creates an image wields enormous influence. And the one who understands the subtleties of human psychology can manage the behavior of others without resorting to brute force. What does this mean in practice? First and foremost, it is necessary to consciously control one's emotions and avoid impulsive reactions. Machiavelli did not recognize universal moral principles, believing that everything depends on the specific situation. What brings success to one may lead to defeat for another. What seems noble in theory may, in practice, lead to strategic failure. Kindness, devoid of insight, turns into foolishness. Honesty, displayed at the wrong time, turns into self-sabotage. Boundless altruism leads to a loss of freedom. To gain independence and achieve success, one must learn to play the game and master its rules perfectly. It all begins with careful observation. One must learn to read people, just as Machiavelli analyzed nobility, paying attention not to their words, but to their actions at moments when they believe no one is watching them. One should evaluate behavior, not empty promises, analyze consistent patterns, not seek excuses. It is important to trust words less and be more interested in the motives hidden behind them. And, above all, one should not succumb to impulsive reactions, but try to anticipate the actions of the manipulator, who always acts strategically. The best defense is to be one step ahead. Next, learn to use silence as a powerful weapon. A common mistake is excessive emotional openness, where people show too much, say too much, and delve into unnecessary explanations. Machiavelli understood that silence can confuse, command respect, and disrupt a manipulator's plans. An unpredictable reaction throws them off balance, depriving them of control over the situation. It is in this resulting void that the opportunity arises to seize the initiative. Another important aspect is mastering the art of ambiguity. Machiavelli taught that to maintain power, one must be able to create the appearance of virtue, without necessarily possessing it in reality. In the modern world, this manifests in the ability to adapt one's speech, manners, and behavior to the surroundings without losing one's individuality. It is not necessary to reveal oneself completely. It is enough to demonstrate just enough to control the perception of others. The rest should be kept to oneself, as true strength lies in what remains hidden. And most importantly, one must take responsibility for their emotional state. Manipulators feed on others' instability. They need their victims to doubt, fear, and waver. When a person knows themselves well, can control their emotions, and remains unwavering even under pressure, they become practically invulnerable to manipulation. Niccolò Machiavelli, a discerning thinker, once remarked that a wise person should follow in the footsteps of outstanding individuals and take example from those who have reached the pinnacle of mastery. Even if one cannot reach their level, one can get as close as possible. In other words, one should rely on the experience of those who have succeeded to stop being a pawn in someone else's game. Now that it is clear how manipulations work and how to effectively defend against them, a logical question arises: how to apply this knowledge in practice? How to transform it into real power, into a new way of life impervious to external influence? This question will be addressed in the concluding part. This discussion will focus on how to take control of your own mind and permanently free yourself from external manipulation. It's time to cut the last invisible strings that still control you. This is arguably the most crucial and challenging step. Until you gain full control over your mind, someone else will inevitably do it for you. And it's not always a villain, a Machiavellian manipulator. Sometimes it can be a smiling person right beside you. Sometimes it's a phrase heard in childhood that you still repeat without question. And sometimes it's society itself, which shapes individuals from an early age to comply, yield, and remain silent. Subtle manipulation, penetrating deep into human consciousness, isn't limited to just words spoken by others. It lies in the very thoughts individuals overlook, failing to subject them to critical analysis and doubt. It manifests in emotions perceived as unquestionable truths, beyond discussion. It hides in decisions proudly labeled choices, but in reality dictated by deep-seated fear, guilt, and an overwhelming need for external approval. True freedom begins with the realization that what is commonly considered free will is, in fact, cleverly disguised conditioning meticulously embedded in the mind. However, achieving this freedom comes at a price. You must shatter the ingrained illusion that all people are driven solely by good intentions. It requires letting go of the self-image of someone who must always be kind, understanding, and ready to help at a moment's notice. You'll need to endure the discomfort of setting personal boundaries, feel the weight of the silence that follows a spoken no, and experience the loneliness that comes from stepping away from destructive relationships that, nonetheless, seemed an integral part of your identity. Manipulation loses its grip when you realize you don't need anyone's approval. The fear of not being liked no longer dictates your actions. The clarity of your own convictions and desires outweighs the need for external validation. And then, finally, comes the moment when you can look those who tried to control you in the eye and calmly state, "No more." This moment becomes the point of no return, marking the attainment of true freedom and independence. The choice of how to use this newfound knowledge is entirely yours. You can return to your accustomed existence, forgetting everything you've heard, continuing to play a part in life's drama, unaware that you are merely a pawn in someone else's game. But there is another path: to immediately begin training your mind, developing observation skills, analytical abilities, the capacity to resist manipulation, and the power to reframe what's happening. You can choose the path of becoming a person impervious to emotional pressure, capable of discerning falsehoods and moving forward confidently, even when those around you are in a state of chaotic motion. The author invites you to share your thoughts in the comments. At what point in your life did you become aware of manipulation? What was the turning point for your awakening? Or perhaps you are still caught in an emotional game and need support to break free from the cycle. Don't hesitate to voice your opinion, for verbalizing a problem is the first step toward resolving it. And if this video served as a catalyst for your awakening, don't stop there. Continue to explore the topic, for every new piece of knowledge is a step on the ladder leading from darkness to light. Continue your ascent, for truth not only grants freedom but also transforms the individual. See you at the summit of understanding.